Okay, welcome back. So on the last video, we got our project set up, we got it initialized, got our boilerplate set up from Create React App. We deleted all the unnecessary files, got it cleaned up and set up, and we got it working in the browser. On this video, we're actually going to build our first component. We're going to learn about props. So we're going to get our component tree set up, and we'll get a little intro into file architecture and good ways to set up your files within your project. Okay, so follow along and let's get started.
So at this point I want to rearrange a couple things and introduce a convention. So within our components folder, we'll create a folder called ToDo. This ToDo folder is going to contain everything to do with to-dos. Let's actually rename this to to-dos. So I'm going to click no for now, because now what we need to do is to import this correctly, we're going to have to update this file path. Okay, save, and let's actually start our development server. Still working? Looks good. Looks good. So a good practice is within your to-do or within your component folder, you want to create an index.js file. What we're going to do is we're going to steal this from here, put it here. Okay. We're going to call this to-dos. We're going to treat this as our parent component. Everything related to to-dos. It's really hard to say. So what we're gonna repurpose this file in a minute, but what we want to do now is create a file called to-do form. So we'll import React from React. What I like to do is when I'm building my component architecture out, to just write in the name of the component within the returned JSX here. That helps me kind of get a hold of what I have rendering where. Okay, now we want to import this here. And I'll show you the reason for doing it this way in just a second. Having this index.js allows us to really clean up our URL, because if I set this to just to-dos, then it's going to default to look for an index.js file, and if it's in there, then it reads from there. So if we come back over here, you'll see now we're getting to-do form. That cleans up your file paths a lot. I mean, and you could actually write this out if you wanted /index, but it's just a shorthand way to do it, and it makes your code a little bit cleaner. Next component we're going to make is to-dos. So to-dos is it's going to map over those to-dos that we get back from the server and render those on the page. Then we'll import here. You can see we have a naming conflict here, so we're going to have to rename this. I think we call this to-do list. And here, do the same thing. And finally, we'll rename the file. Okay. Let's look back here, and we'll see we have to-do form and to-do list. And just as a sanity check, we'll check the components hierarchy here, and we'll see we have our app, which pulls in our to-dos, and our to-dos contains both to-do form and to-do list. There's another check here. We have our app here that pulls in to-do, and actually what we should do here is rename this here to to-dos, because the thing is we can name it whatever we want when we import it, and that's why this worked. So you can, you can name this whatever you want. It's important to name it something that makes sense, that's not going to confuse you. And you can already see I'm getting my wires crossed here and naming things weirdly. So we have our app, which pulls in to-dos. We're importing to-dos into our app.js, which our app here is our to-dos. Remember, this is /index, so our index file actually pulls in to-do form and to-do list. So the next thing we'll do is we'll go into to-do list, and this, like I said before, this is where we're going to be mapping over all of our to-dos. So we want to import our to-do component into this one. And what we'll do for now is we'll just create some mock data. So we'll say const to-dos is equal to an array. And we essentially wanted this to be an array of objects, right? Okay. We can give these an ID, and we can give this, let's give this a message. Okay, so we'll give this 1, 2, and 3. We'll say walk the dog. We'll say take out trash. Finish tutorial video. Okay, so we kind of got some seed data to work with here. And so then what we can do is you can actually write a JavaScript function right in to the JSX, and you do it this way. Okay, we'll open and close some curly braces. I'll say todos.map. Okay. For each to-do, we want to run this function. We want to return a to-do element. So what we want to do here now is actually pass this to-do down to the to-do component so it can use it can actually render it. In this case, we're only concerned about passing the message. That's all this component will care about. So the way we do that is we declare what looks like an attribute. Okay, and we can literally call this anything we want. But we're going to call it ToDo. That it's good practice to name it something that makes sense. In this case, we're passing a ToDo, so it makes sense to name it ToDo. And what we want to do is we want to pass the individual ToDo that we're on when we map through this. So at each iteration of this loop, we want to pass that ToDo down to this ToDo and render. We want to return that ToDo rendered, okay? So we'll save that, then we'll go over to our ToDo component, and we've entered props here. What this tells this component is that it's going to receive something via props. We don't know what it is yet, but it knows it's going to receive something, okay? Now we can actually use the data sent through props. What we'll do is say props.ToDo. Props is an object, okay, and attached to that props object we have ToDo that we sent through to it, okay, and all we care about is the message, right? So we want to say .message. We'll save that. We'll go over to our browser and we'll see we have our ToDos listed out on the screen. So you notice here we have this little error. Each child in the list should have a unique key prop. This is React saying that it wants a unique identifier for every child in a list when you're mapping over something. So that's an easy fix. Go back to our to-do list. And since we want something unique, we have a few options, right? We could use the index. You know, in this case, we have a unique ID. Each one of these is unique, right? So what we'll do is say key equals ToDo.id. Save that. There we go. There you have it. We've now taken an array and used that to render a series of components onto the screen.
Okay, awesome. We got our files laid out. We got the architecture. We got our files laid out. We got the architecture set, and we're ready to go. On the next video, we're gonna be moving into managing state hooks with specifically the useState hook, and we're gonna be building out our form and handling, managing user input and passing that data properly and using it in the proper fashion. So I'll see you on the next video.